only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, and welcome to Into the Impossible, a podcast of stories, ideas, and speculations from the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. Today, we're very fortunate to hear the story behind the Ansari XPRIZE, which effectively launched the private spaceflight industry. We're going to hear from two key players in this story and the journalist who traced the history of this massively inspiring quest. It's a little bit of a different show because what you're going to hear comes from one of our live events. So for those of you who only know the Clarke Center from this podcast, we also do all kinds of research and artistic projects, and we host public events at UC San Diego, in addition to partnering with the Smithsonian Magazine on the Future is Here Festival in Washington, D.C. So just to give you a little taste, in the last few months, we hosted a premiere of the film Arrival in support of our Clarion Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Workshop, where we spoke with Ted Chiang, himself a Clarion alum, about writing the story that the film is based on. We partnered with the Raw Science Film Festival to present the inaugural Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination Award in Speculative Media, which also went to Arrival. We convened a workshop at the University of Liverpool in London on accelerating human imagination. We supported the new book Chasing Shadows, Visions of Our Coming Transparent World, edited by David Brin and Stephen Potts, which features science fiction and essays on the future of privacy, which is now out from Tor Books. We participated in the 2016 Arthur C. Clarke Awards, which honored three visionaries: Jeff Bezos, President, Chief Executive Officer, and Chairman of the Board of Amazon.com, who received the Innovator Award; Brian Farron, Co-Chairman of Applied Minds, who received the Imagination in Service to Society Award; and NASA for Lifetime Achievement in Interplanetary Exploration. We also participated in the lab at the Google Cultural Institute's Machine Learning Summit in Paris and have curated two exhibitions at UC San Diego in honor of the underappreciated pioneer of AI-created art, Harold Cohen, with an exhibition catalog forthcoming. So as you can see, we stay busy. So we thought, why not use the podcast as a way to share some of these exciting activities, in addition to our more typical thematic episodes. And today's is a pretty big one. On stage, we had Peter Diamandis, the founder of the XPRIZE Foundation, Human Longevity Inc., Singularity University, Planetary Resources, and International Space University, among other things. And he was here to speak about his journey from dreaming about being an astronaut as a young man and getting Arthur C. Clarke himself to buy him and his friends dinner, to being responsible for kicking off the commercial spaceflight race of today. Joining him was Julian Guthrie, author of the recent book How to Make a Spaceship, which chronicles Peter's journey, as well as those of the various teams trying to build the first private rocket to take a person to space and back safely. And Brian Binnie, the pilot of Spaceship One, the craft designed by Scaled Composites that became the first private spacecraft. So without further ado, we'll go to the event, which was moderated by Dr. Ep04, Associate Director of the Clarke Center and biomedical researcher and neurophysiologist at UCSD.
It's my great privilege to host this panel this evening on how to build a spaceship. Somebody was asking us how you get it done, and my friend here will give us some inside secrets on how you get things built. I'm Dr. Ep04. I'm a physician and neuroscientist here at the UC San Diego, and I'm also the scholar in residence of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination, which is just unbelievably fun job for anybody, especially a physician. I trained in Canada, but I've gone to a few interesting institutions. I was at the International Space University in the first class. I was a chief medical officer of an airline called Zero G Corporation. I've been a faculty member at Singularity University, and I am the medical director of the Qualcomm Tricorder XPRIZE. And I'd like to point out some of our XPRIZE volunteers out here and staff. Thank you so much for showing up. So the interesting thing about that little list of institutions, my friend founded all of them. And it's just a fantastic thing to be able to be here.
Someone's got to get a job.
Well, that's right. I'm still looking for the next one. So let's hear the story this evening. So a little audience participation here. So who stayed up a little bit late last night? Anybody? Okay. So who thinks that baseball players are heroes? Yeah, so a few. How about people who put their hide on the line and sit in a vehicle and fly up to space? Who thinks those people are heroes?
Yay.
Yes. And we have one on stage with us tonight, Brian Binnie, the XPRIZE winning pilot, along with his colleagues, and he's going to tell us the story about scaled composites. Brian is just a supreme human being, pilot for the United States Navy for 20 years, and then he flew, and let me make sure I get this right, every privately built manned space vehicle. He's flown them. And so...
There aren't that many.
Well, and there's the guy who's been in them all. And now is still working on building spacecraft, and most importantly, I think is going out like he is this evening and spreading the word about the importance of human adventure and taking us out into space. With us is Julian Guthrie, the author of the book that really tells the story. And I got to tell you, Julian, it's just a total nostalgia trip for me. All these different things that you talk about. Julian is an award-winning journalist. She spent 20 years at the San Francisco Chronicle. She's been published in Time and the Wall Street Journal, and has written several books. Her the book preceding this one was The Billionaire and the Mechanic, a story about Larry Ellison and the quest for the America's Cup. And when you talk about America's Cup as an example, what do you win when you win the America's Cup? Anybody? Well, you get to have the cup, but you don't even get to keep it, right? It goes to the next winner. When we win, we'll talk about XPRIZes and incentives. And so, of course, our guest of honor here, Peter Diamandis, a fabulous guy who has gone to Harvard and MIT, founded 2 universities and many, many companies and all kinds of interesting institutions, and is someone who's helping us move out in the world and be inspired. I think most importantly, his recent books, Abundance and Bold, really tell the story of his view of the world. And it's so cool that Julian stood up and told the story about you and got us all those little stories about the Greek Orthodox choir boy and things like that. So, all right.
Altar boy, I can't sing worth a damn.
There you go. All right, altar boy. Okay. So, so for me, let's go back a little bit. So for me, one of the privileges of being part of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination is getting to talk about Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah.
And so, Peter, please tell us your story that's so beautifully recounted in the book about your meeting Uncle Arthur,
yeah,
and how you just button-hooked him to help you out.
Yeah, so so I had met Todd Hawley and Bob Richards, who also play prominent roles in the book, who are my really early co-founders of SEDS. My first organization ever is a group called Students for Exploration and Development of Space. It's grown tremendously. Jeff Bezos was the president of the Princeton chapter. I was the president of the MIT chapter and the chairman of it. And it was just a group of college students who are passionate about space. And I don't know if there's a SEDS chapter here. Is there? There is? Awesome. Yeah, great. Makes me proud. And in 1982, a friend of ours, David C. Webb, was running the non-governmental side of a United Nations conference on the peaceful uses of outer space in Vienna. And we got invited to go to Vienna to go and speak at this. And here's these guys, we were 19, 20 years old at the time, and we end up in Vienna, and it was just like this, all of these generals and heads of nations, and we're like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and we were at the opening reception, and I was with Todd and Bob, and they looked over there and they saw Arthur C. Clarke. And they were like, "Oh my God, it's Arthur C. Clarke." And I go, "Who?" And it's like, "Arthur C. Clarke, the inventor of communication satellite, this amazing author, 2001. And I remembered I had read Childhood's End for a high school assignment. That was the only thing I'd ever read. And they were like, "Well, let's go talk to him." And they said, "No, we can't go talk to him." I said, "Yeah, let's go talk to him." And so we walk over, and I introduce ourselves, and we're talking to him. In a minute or two into the conversation, he leaves. And I was like, "That was rude." And we go later to hear him speak, and he's speaking, and we're in the front row, and I'm like still kind of miffed that he had left. And I leaned over to Todd and Bob, and I said, "I'll make you a bet. He's going to buy us dinner tonight." I have no idea what came over me to say that, but I did. And so after he stands up and he goes back, I sort of race after him, and I say, "Excuse me, Dr. Clarke." He goes, "No, it's Mr. Clarke." I said, "Okay, Professor Clarke, whatever. I'd like to ask you a favor. Would you mind if we bought you dinner tonight?" And he's like, "Okay." And so he says, "I'm staying at this hotel," and so we go over and we meet him at the hotel. Of course, he buys dinner, not three college kids. And during dinner, I say, sort of coin the term Uncle Arthur, and he became Uncle Arthur. If you guys ever watched Bewitched, that was one of the sort of characters in it. And we invited him, ultimately become the Chancellor of International Space University, which he started a few years later. We created the Arthur C. Clarke Award. He became a friend and a mentor to us, and got to know him and his universe and many people like Fred Durant, and it was just a amazing thing to know him. We all went to Sri Lanka a number of times, and I consider myself an honor to have gotten to know him.
And me too.
Yeah.
So other people that are really important in your story, and I can corroborate this, are your parents. And as I outlined earlier, I've been fortunate to be involved in so many things that you've done, and wherever I went, your parents were there. Your parents were there. Yeah. They're just lovely people, and so much your staunchest supporters. So Peter, you got to tell us how you got over crushing your father's dream of your becoming a doctor.
So as I grew up, my parents were both born in a small island in Greece, Lesbos, a small village in Lesbos, and came over. My father, first person of his family to, leave the island to go to school, to medical school, or of his village at least. And he came to the U.S. and became a successful physician there, and of course it was always assumed I'd become a doctor as well. And I remember the moment in time in the kitchen where I told my mom that I was going to become an astronaut, and she said, "Well, that's nice, son, but you're going to become a doctor." And so as I learned about the astronaut program, at least the government astronaut program, I did the calculations and realized my chances of becoming a doctor, an astronaut, were extremely low. The highest probability is if you followed Brian's footsteps, being a Navy fighter pilot. I think had the highest probability function, and an Air Force secondary, but Navy pilots had the highest probability of becoming an astronaut. And then the next thing, if you weren't a government pilot, was being a physician. And so I sort of rationalized my mind I'd become a doctor. And I ended up going to medical school to make my parents happy.
Harvard Medical School.
To make my parents happy. And I remember having this and Julian does a beautiful job in the book telling the story where in your third year of medical school you have to apply for your internships and residencies of where you're going to go. And I had during medical school, I had started International Space University, I had started a launch company, I was doing everything but medical school in medical school. And I found myself scared shitless about the idea of having to go and actually become a real doctor. because I was either going to keep doing what I was doing and be harmful to people, or I was going to have to give up my dreams and actually be roped into becoming a physician. So I called in my third year of medical school. I have to turn in where I want to go do for my match from internship residency. I was like, there's no way I can do this. And I called someone that you know as well, Dr. Larry Young, who was heading the manned vehicle lab at MIT, and I'm on the phone like in a panic and saying, you have to let me come back to MIT. So I applied for a leave of absence from medical school to go back and do my aerospace engineering undergrad and graduate degree to do what I really wanted to do. Broke that to my parents after I'd gotten admitted. And finally went back and wrapped up my last year of medical school. And during that time, one of my favorite stories that Julian tells is getting called into the dean's office at medical school, where the dean says, Peter, your interns are telling me you're on the phone all the time. You're never paying attention. You're not there. What is going on? And do you want to graduate? And now this is the time at which I'm running International Space University and running this launch company, and I literally bought one of the first brick Motorola phones, and I'm sneaking out of surgery to go call and find out how the rocket engine tests are going, and I'm just working. I'd be doing the medical like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Rotations, and then I would sleep till noon and then go work at the office from noon until 10 p.m. And that was my sort of cycle I would do. And I started just almost breaking into tears, and I fessed up to Dean Tostison, that I was doing this stuff, but I wanted to graduate. And it's like, okay, listen, I'll make you a deal. If you pass part 2 of the medical boards, and you promise not to practice, we'll let you graduate.
And so,
just barely passed the medical board.
Oh, there you go.
I've seen your the results.
My transcripts.
Yeah, and
come on, they were not that great.
Surprising, but they were.
And so, what did your parents? So, how did your parents?
I mailed them a copy of my diploma. My dad was proud, and he was, they were fine. But it literally, for a decade that followed, my mom would say every day, whenever I talked to her, it's not too late for you to go and practice.
I see.
Well, because medicine was something that was secure, and space was risky in every sense of the word. So
it still is.
Yes. So an interesting thing that I hadn't really known is that your long-standing interest in longevity, and literally, I just picked you up over at Human Longevity here.
We have a few folks from HLI here in the audience,
Diego,
right?
Oh, yeah, so HLI. Good job. And so tell us a little bit about longevity and your dreams and schemes about living forever.
Not forever, just 700 years, which is a silly number, right? Because if you can live, an extra 100, you can live forever. But so in medical school, I just remember thinking that this notion that we all accept death as a really silly idea, and that it's a hardware and software problem, and that there were species of life on planet Earth that lived hundreds of years, and if they could, why couldn't we? And I still fundamentally believe that. And so my interest in opening up space was either going to accelerate space through the XPRIZE, or we're going to sort of lengthen the human lifespan to allow the government to finally catch up with what we wanted them to do in the first place. And so I believed that, and I have believed that. And 3 years ago, Craig Venter of genomics, human sequencing fame, and Bob Haruri of the stem cell world, and I started a company called Human Longevity here in La Jolla, whose mission it is to add 30 plus healthy years onto a person's life. We have something called the health nucleus here. People come and spend 8 hours and 25K with us, and we basically digitize them and give them a insight into what is likely to end their life, and how do we find that early and prevent it from ending their life, and extend the health lifespan that way. And I think this next decade is going to pay huge dividends on companies that are finding senescent cells and readying us stem cell, reinventing or revitalizing our stem cell population, genomics. I mean, this is the decade that we're going to really transform the practice of medicine immensely.
As we are working with the Qualcomm tricorder XPRIZE.
Yep.
So let's turn to XPRIZE a little bit. And I had a lovely discussion today with some people who were interested in creating their own XPRIZE, and so we had a long discussion about prizeability. And so I think you kind of worked into this backwards. In other words, I think you created this Ansari XPRIZE and came up with all the principles afterwards. But tell us a little bit about prizes and the thinking behind prizes and their importance.
So here's this 9-year-old child sitting in front of you who's wanted to be an astronaut, growing up, drinking all the tank, getting my hands on, getting my pilot's license and all of that. And when I'd met enough astronauts who told me your chances are 1 in 1,000 of being accepted, even if you get accepted, half the astronaut corps has never flown. They call them penguins because they have wings, but they don't fly. And then even if you do fly, you might fly once or twice during your career. And I'm like, not my idea of wanting to go to space. I want to go every weekend, so. And a dear friend, someone that you know well and you guys all know well, Greg Marinac, had given me a copy of Lindbergh's biography, a 1957 Pulitzer Prize winning book called Spirit of St. Louis, maybe 1954. Anyway, I read that Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic to win a prize in 1927, not on a whim. And I became enamored with prizes and started studying prizes like the Longitude Prize offered in 1714 by the British, or won in 1714, and Napoleon's Prize. And there have been prizes, lots of prizes, crossing the English Channel, lots of aviation prizes, and sort of like a prize for doing some crazy-ass thing which is clearly defined, like first person to do this. And by the time I'd finished reading the book, I'd written XPRIZE in the back of the book because I had no idea who was going to be the Nobel or the Pulitzer or the Orteig who was going to put up the money. And X was a variable to be replaced by the name of the person who was going to put up the cash. It just took so long to find that person, the X sort of stuck around. And then it took 8 years for the XPRIZE to be won from launch in 96 to 2004. And towards the end of that, the idea that this prize modality could work for other grand challenges stuck around. It was 5 years ago. I was having lunch with Paul Jacobs, then CEO, now executive chairman of Qualcomm. And in that conversation, we talked about the tricorder and said that'd be a great idea to bring the tricorder to life. And the Qualcomm Foundation put up $20 million, 10 for the purse, 10 for the operations of the prize. 330 teams entered that competition, as you know, and we have 5 finalists and a winner in the within the next year.
That's right. So the neat thing. So let's turn to Julian, and I think the neat thing about what you've done and what you do as an author is talk about people. Of course, it's the best thing to write about. And so we just mentioned Charles Lindbergh. And so, of course, an important person, there's a picture of him at Le Bourget, is Charles Lindbergh's grandson, Eric. And you spent a lot of time talking about him in the book and a lot of other people. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about Eric and your story that you found out about him.
So I was drawn into this story, as Eric, as you said, because of the characters, because I love nonfiction. You cannot make things up better than they are in reality. And I met Peter and did a profile on him for the San Francisco Chronicle and heard about the origin of the XPRIZE. And I was really captivated by this history that was made, but even more so by the people who got involved. And as I started learning about, Peter is this wide-eyed 8-9-year-old boy watching Apollo 11 land on the moon, and this quest that he went on, and this refusal to give up on this seemingly impossible dream. I was taken in by that. Then you have people who, once Peter launched the prize in 1996, He announced this $10 million prize, by the way, without the $10 million. Little minor detail. Very audacious fellow. Kind of like how you approached Arthur C. Clarke, fearlessly. So you announce the prize, then you have all of these other teams from across the globe, people dropping out of engineering school, building rockets, in backyards in Romania, in rice fields in Texas, and all of their stories I was really intrigued by. Why do people put themselves at risk like this? What is worth it for them to do this? And it wasn't just the $10 million prize, it was this shared vision of a private path to space, which simply didn't exist. It was this idea that this question, can small teams do what only the world's largest governments had done before? So there were these great questions there. And then I learned about Burt Rutan, who is this larger-than-life character, true genius, working, as this maverick in the Mojave Desert, and had made his name through these very contrarian, wild-looking airplanes, designed the Voyager he was best known for, which was the first plane to fly nonstop, non-refueled around the world, flown by his brother Dick Rutan. He's in the book as well. Eric Lindbergh, of course I knew of Charles Lindbergh's story and all that came with it, all of the fame and also the tragedy. There was great light and then there was great darkness because of what happened due to his fame. So I met Eric Lindbergh, who comes into this story in a really profound way through a really kind of nice story that Peter tells in the book. But Eric was hobbled by rheumatoid arthritis at the time they met. And Peter wanted to get a Lindbergh involved in the XPRIZE.
Any Lindbergh, just a Lindbergh.
Yeah, and Eric was supposedly the only flying Lindbergh. But when they met, he was close to being crippled by rheumatoid arthritis, very debilitated. And so his path of, you saw this picture here is triumphant Eric Lindbergh. But when this story starts, when Peter meets Eric, it was just the opposite. It was a man trying to figure out what he was going to do with this new reality, which was the opposite of everything he had known before. He had been super physical, super strong, very athletic, and suddenly he is hobbled to the point where he is living in pain. So
walking with two crutches.
Yeah, and so his involvement in the XPRIZE, I just found, there's so many of these profound stories where they start in a certain place and there are all these obstacles and they end up in a very different place. They end up with this triumphant moment, and it was shared by so many people in the story, and Eric was in a way rescued by the XPRIZE, and he very specifically rescued the XPRIZE financially when they needed it most. So that connection from Charles Lindbergh inspiring his flight, the Orteig Prize inspiring Peter, then this connection to the grandson, Eric Lindbergh, and rescuing the XPRIZE when they need it most. There are all these stories that pulled me in and embody the best of the human spirit, where you have great bravery, great innovation, and great tenacity. And all of these, these qualities that we so need, they're all here with these characters. And I met the test pilots who are straight out of the right stuff. I mean, these guys are so amazing. You're going to hear Brian's story. These test pilots who were working for Burt Rutan in the Mojave Desert, they're flying these wildly innovative, experimental, seemingly, they look so improbable, these flying machines of Burt Rutan. And here Burt is trying to he has this secret spaceship program in the Mojave Desert being funded, which wasn't known at the time, by Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. And so, there's a great story. There are two test pilots who are really featured prominently in the book. And one is Mike Melville. He was 63 years old, amazing story unto itself. 63 years old when he first attempted to white knuckle it to the start of space in Spaceship One, and a very dramatic story. There was Brian Binnie here, who really incredible journey that he went on, which he can talk about, but where he had a landing that wasn't exactly ideal after his first supersonic flight. I'm sorry, he's reliving it now. And his path to redemption, so to speak, is a really powerful one. What happens when you get knocked down, and how do you get back up again? In his case, it was to get back into the cockpit. And his story of not only doing that, but surpassing that is really inspiring. And Peter, again, more than 150 people turned him down for the funding of this prize. And why do you continue? What is it that kept him going when all of these people, it was time and again he was asked two questions. Why isn't NASA doing this? And what if someone gets killed? And he kept at it, and it was just this slog at times. And even those who were close to him, he had many people telling him, it's never gonna happen. This is never gonna happen, you gotta give up. So it's the people and their stories that drew me in, and the best of the human spirit. I wanted to write a story that was a great narrative, and I found a story that had these really inspiring messages and people.
Thank you, Julie. Well, Brian, it really is a privilege to have you here. Again, I think it is a heroic thing to get inside a spacecraft and take it up to space. Here's your spacecraft. It's being carried up. The way it goes up into the sky to get some altitude, and then drops and gets rocketed all the way up to the boundaries of space beyond the atmosphere. So I got to put you on the spot here. If the story is, if you ask a pilot who the second best pilot in the world is, he would be hard to tell you. But well, there you go. Well, but you had some special guys that you worked with on Spaceship One, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about Bert and Doug and Mike and Pete Siebold and your team there that you worked with, and then we'll talk a little bit about what happened to you.
I like to refer to Brian as our Charles Lindbergh, because in one sense we were the organization giving away the prize, and he was the pilot who made that flight to win the 10 million. And just a tremendous human being we have in you.
Thanks, sir. Maybe just to add a little depth to that comment. My wife graduated from UCSD. My oldest son graduated from UCSD. So when I was invited here, they said, well, it's this place, International Center, Great Hall, whatever. And I go, well, I know that campus. I'll figure it out. So I arrived here around, I don't know, it was like 4 o'clock for a 6:30 meeting. And I'm totally lost. I mean, this place has changed so much. And of course, being a guy, I won't stop and ask somebody. I'll just kind of drive around, and I'm trying to Google, and the directions all seem to be haywire. And anyway, so it took another hour just to go, only because I saw the signs on the streets, not for any other epiphany. But this group here, extremely talented, and we span 3 decades. Peter Siebold, at the time this was taken, was about 30-something. I liken him to the Tiger Woods of flight tests. He's just a natural. Doug Shane, in the yellow shirt, had the lead on bringing White Knight up to speed, and he was 40-something. Another really smart guy. All have these disarming smiles, and yours truly was 50, Bert was 60, and Mike a little north of that, around 62, 63 at the time of this photo. So everybody's smart and clever and motivated, for the most part. Doug did not care to fly the spaceship. Maybe he was wary of it.
Maybe you knew too much.
For good reason. And at least for the first powered flight, there wasn't a whole lot of scrambling going on to say, pick me, kind of thing. And I was more than happy to step up to the plate, and I got the nod from Doug, who was the flight test director, and probably seconded by Bert, that was always behind the green curtain. A Navy guy that's used to being kind of kicked in the butt off aircraft carriers could probably handle this motor lighting off, and we'll let him do it. He's the new guy anyway. Something bad happens, maybe not such a big loss, but it was a very dynamic group, and I don't want to get into too many details, but small companies, still waters run deep. And the sort of the allegiances and who's on first and who's your friend, it is a great part of it in the book. So it was, it made for everything you did very interesting.
So there's a...
Can I tell a quick story?
Please, please.
But you got to tell about the lighting of the motor and the first flight.
We got time. Go for it.
Yeah.
Talk about the supersonic flight, and then...
I think he's got you can advance some minutes ago. So this is the configuration for reentry, which was part of Bert's genius and creativity. For those of you that don't circle in the space world, it's the reentry that is by far the most difficult and dangerous phase of the flight. It's not the boost up, it's not the stuff you do in space, it's coming back down. And so he really turned on that problem and came up with this configuration, which looks, break the vehicle in half, essentially, right? And that's how you're going to re-enter. And there were a lot of critics, as you might imagine, because nobody had ever done this before, but it worked like sliced bread. I mean, it was just, there was never an issue, never a problem. Sometimes, it's the things that you worry about that just go, well, that was some honey band. Who would have thought that?
Genius of aeronautics.
Yeah, that was great. So the first powered flight came to me, and it went, it was exciting. That motor lights off, and your whole world changes right now. It was like being run over by a tsunami if you ever go surfing or something like that. It was just
more dramatic than the carrier takeoff. By order of magnitude?
By an order of magnitude, and it didn't end after 2 seconds, it just kept going. And the harnesses in the cockpit weren't well designed, and I basically slipped out of the seat almost. At the time, there was a United Airlines advertisement saying, "You are now free to roam about the country," or something like that. And that's how I felt, because there goes the spaceship, and I'm at the back of the bus trying to, stay in control. But it all works out. You can't, to an observer, it all looked great, but if you saw what was going inside the cockpit, it was mayhem. It was a calamity, but fine, that's flight test sometimes. And then all I had to do was land it. And I had just had the flight before that, and I felt very comfortable. And but we had made a modification to the vehicle in the flight controls that came back to haunt me. And I didn't really, when you start to land an airplane, your gains start to pick up, and you exercise finer or more demanding control of the vehicle's attitude and flight path and all that kind of good stuff. And in the process of doing that, I aggravated these dampeners that were put into the system. And the analogy sometimes I use for those that aren't pilots is if you're writing your signature and you're given a pen whose weight changes from an ounce to 12 pounds sort of indiscriminately, your signature's kind of going to be all over the place. Well, that's kind of what it was in the final 10 seconds. And the only thing I knew was if I let go of the stick, the problems went away. But if I let go of the stick, I'm going to, demolish the vehicle. If I stay in the loop, I was thinking I'm going to land upside down. So I kind of let go of the stick, and then I'm sort of trying to make this Hail Mary play, literally, with about 5 seconds to go, and I put in what I thought was a decent correction, hope for the best, crossed my fingers, wanted to pass go, but I didn't. And you can go through life building 100 bridges, right? But you get a little bit of dirt on a plastic spaceship. They're not calling you Brian the bridge builder.
Too bad.
Well,
the major parts were still there.
They were, but you can imagine in a small company that now is lit up, the opinion and the attitude about lighting a rocket motor has changed dramatically. And this was just before Christmas in 2003, and we knew the XPRIZE had been extended. Thank you.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of work to be done.
This was on the 100th anniversary of flight, right?
Yeah.
December
Wright brothers,
17th,
yeah.
2003.
Yeah.
And originally we had December 17th, 2003 as the deadline for the $10 million. And long story of the financial engineering of the prize, but we ended up negotiating with the Hole in One insurance company an extra payment if they'd let us go through the end of 2004. And if we had not done that, the prize would have never been won. We'd not be having this conversation, but we did. And that gave Brian and his team enough time to dust off the spaceship and fly a few times.
So the point is, Julian's book goes into great detail about how I try to dust myself off and get back into the game. And it's a great lesson in life. If you're going to have dreams, everybody wants to succeed, but the flip side of that coin is you got to be willing to fail. And sometimes that gets a bad rep. The Apollo 13 movies, failure's not an option. Well, really it is. I mean, you don't get one without the other. And so how you view failure and how you respond to it is really, I think, a lot about what life tries to teach us. And nobody I know skates through life. Peter certainly hasn't. Julian's had to work for the two of us for the last couple of years, so she's and it was tough, but
you got back into the cockpit for that historic flight.
So here's the little video. Maybe you can introduce the video.
Yeah, so what's all the fuss about, really? What's up there? What's the attraction? Why the passion? Where does it come from? Who has it? Who doesn't? And John Glenn, the first American astronaut to circumnavigate the globe, came back and said, "Boy, what an experience! Everybody should have an opportunity to see this, but it's really hard to describe." And that kind of stuck with me. And then I remember as a kid watching in 1968 this movie that came out off of Clarke's, and here we are in his building dedicated to it. And Stanley Kubrick, I thought, did a phenomenal job. Just totally took me in, and the soundtrack that went along with that movie, I found very compelling. So after this experience, I started, piecing those two together, and this video runs for a couple of minutes, but it's sort of my dedication to Arthur C. Clarke. The movie, Johann Strauss is the backdrop, the Blue Danube. And so this is why we do what we do. And maybe it'll appeal to some of you that are in the SEDS group and others not, but we need sound. So as exciting as that rocket motor ride is up there, by far the best part is when you shut it down, because three wonderful things happen, and they happen just in the blink. The shaking, shuddering vibrations of that motor go away, the shrill, shrieking sounds disappear, and it's as though you step across a line, entirely new dimension, and the instant karma of weightlessness. And then the music starts. You're in space in a spaceship. And if you're lucky enough to fly Spaceship 2, the cabin is large enough, you can unbuckle the seatbelt. You don't have to think about drifting up to the nearest window. And it's as though somebody has pulled back a stage curtain for the benefit of your eyes only. There it is, the black void that is space. It's a bit of a mystery, it's a menace, but you can sense its majesty. And if that spooks you just a little bit, do a lazy cartwheel and look out below, because there is a panorama the likes you've never seen. From Mojave, there's San Francisco to the north, Baja, Mexico to the south, Pacific Ocean, Sierra Nevada mountains, weather patterns you normally only see in the evening news. And separating these two improbable extremes, this thin blue electric ribbon of light. And that's the atmosphere. You're in space in a spaceship. Listen to that. Isn't that nice? So peaceful, so serene, so sweet. But I'm here to tell you, everything you feel in your body, because you've worked hard to get there, for lack of a more sophisticated word, is wow. And everything you see with your eyes, so much more dynamic than any camera or video, is wow. This is kind of cool. This is the reaction control system. It's how you change the attitude of the vehicle while you're in space. I'll show it to you again. It's coming off the left wingtip there. A little spray of mist. You see the wings start to turn and the Earth will come back into view. So you're about 2 minutes into a 4-minute experience. One that I think you'll find to be uplifting. One that'll give you goosebumps. One that'll shift your perspective on just about everything forever, leave you full of life and a joy for it. Thank you.
Wow. That was fabulous. That was lovely. Thank you so much. So I think we've talked about how this story is about people and special people. And I don't know, maybe Peter, you can, to finish up this. I was there that day, and with my daughter, and we watched it. And there were thousands of people. I remember driving in the middle of the night to go to the airport because the launch had to be in the morning before the wind came up. So it had to leave really, really early. And so in the middle of the night, there were miles and miles of cars with their lights on, and there's a picture of them coming in. Can you tell us about all the people and what you felt on that day?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? The Spaceship had done a test flight on June 21st of 2004 as sort of we call it X0. It wasn't an official XPRIZE flight. It wasn't carrying the weight or volume or the seats required. And we got notice from the Scaled Composites team that they were going to make their first official XPRIZE flight. They had to give us sufficient notice on September 29th. And we knew that they were going to fly on that day. And then they had to fly within 2 weeks afterwards. And the Scaled team being, I think enjoying the dramatic and enjoying the anniversaries had picked, December 17th, 2003 for Brian's flight, which was the Wright brothers' centennial. And they picked October 4th of 2004 for the second attempt of the XPRIZE. You guys all know what October 4th is, right? It's Sputnik. Yes. October 4th, 1957 was the the launch of Sputnik. And we ended up having, sending out as many announcements as we could, but the word got out. The word got out, and we had school buses coming, thousands of people. I mean, probably 10,000 plus people at least. I don't know what the estimate you have.
They're all double that, 25 to 27.
Okay.
Was,
and hundreds of news trucks, just news trucks and people there. And it was just, the desert was filled with people. And it was just, I remember, getting there the night before and getting up at 3 a.m. And Brian, what time did you wake? One of the things that I find crazy, and the stories are there. So Brian had that dramatic flight, and here he is. Mike Melville had flown X0 on June 21 and flown the X1 flight, first XPRIZE qualifying flight on September 29th. And Brian, you were chosen to do the winning flight. How many days before the flight?
it was a Thursday night, so I had Friday and Saturday to kind of get my head wrapped around it.
You've given 2 days notice that you're doing the next flight. Like, I hadn't flown the vehicle since that December flight a year earlier. And that night, you had your in-laws in, and I find amazing the fact that you ended up sleeping on your couch.
With the family dog.
With the family dog. And how many hours of sleep did you get that night?
2.5 or
About the same that Lindbergh got before he took off.
The analogy of Lindbergh, who got barely any flight the night before he made his May 20th departure from Roosevelt Field. And then you got up at what time, and what time did you get to the airport?
The alarm was set for 2:15. I wanted to be there no later than 3 because I had to do a whole bunch of other administrative stuff because I briefed the entire evolution, not only what I was going to do, but what White Knight was going to do, what all the chase aircraft were going to do, and what's the weather and all that kind of stuff. So the brief started at 4:30, and that gave me an hour to just sort of, assimilate the day.
And I want to focus the spotlight really on Brian and the amazing stories Julian tells about him. I love the fact that he's there, he's cool, he's calm, he's collected, until that very moment when his mother-in-law shows up. Please tell that story.
Yeah, so she's a wonderful woman, but she's a lot like Raymond's mother, and everybody loves Raymond or whatever. But so there's all these people I don't recognize in the hangar, and it's time for me to, get into the spaceship. And as I'm kind of walking in that direction, she comes out of the crowd unannounced, and she wants to give me a hug. Good wishes, and I'm thinking, well, that's generally a good thing, right? If your mother-in-law is, not barking at you, gives you a hug, you take them. Except she was carrying a large cup of McDonald's coffee, 16 ounces thing. And as she's coming towards me, she's got this coffee in one hand, and she's going to give me a hug. And I'm kind of watching this play out in slow motion, going, I wonder what the game plan is for that cup of coffee. Well, there was no game plan. And she just sweeps her arms around me, and the coffee just starts spilling down my flight suit. And, I just had a kind of a T-shirt underneath, but it was freaking hot, just like...
And sweet.
And heavily vanilla sugared. And I tell you, when you get into that small little spaceship cabin and they close the door, that's all you can smell. I mean, I went to space half burnt and
very sweet. And of course, every ounce of weight translates to altitude on this flight. And the June 21st flight that Brian's colleague Mike Melville flew just barely made it to space by like 20 feet or some ridiculous small margin. And I remember one of your engineers calculating.
He calculated that if I was wearing 12 out of 16 ounces, then I just lost 400 feet
of altitude. But of course, Brian flies a magically perfect trajectory. The best flight ever of the ship, and the last flight of the ship. And not only does he, make it to space to win the XPRIZE by a huge margin, you broke a few records as well.
The X-15 was a vehicle that sort of flew these trajectories back, on their government funding in the 60s, and there was an altitude record set by Joe Walker back in '63, and we soared past that by some almost 15,000 feet, which, it's kind of hard to put these numbers out there and make them meaningful for you, but, there was the bar for the XPRIZE. There was the requirement not to be spinning out of the atmosphere, which had been the flight before, so that Sir Richard Branson's interest in Spaceship 2 would be maintained. And then Bert, right at the last minute, I mean, literally as I'm walking out there, he kind of pulls me aside and says, the X-15 altitude is this. See what you can do. And so it's like, holy moly, I'm worried about that freaking landing as much as anything else. And but the little spaceship that could just...
and the pilot that could, you nailed the landing. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so again, as a story, there was checks and speeches and all kinds of things, and then they had to take the little spacecraft back to its home and its hangar, and I happened to be standing beside the taxiway and was able to take this picture of Brian standing on top of Spaceship One. So thank you so much for our panel. Just a wonderful, wonderful discussion. We're very, very pressed for time, but I'd like to give maybe one or two students a chance to ask a question. Do we have any students? Now's your chance. You got one of the best entrepreneurs in the world here, a fantastic writer, and an astronaut. Come on, who's going to ask a question? Give us one of our students, come on. And the UCSD family here. Come on. There we go. There's a student.
Yeah, let's go for it. That's great.
Sorry if I'm imagining a different flight, but whose idea were the M&Ms?
That was Mike on the very first flight.
Oh, okay. That was that flight. I remember that very specifically.
And you would think, Mike Melville, M&Ms, the alliteration, just what a perfect match. And you would think they would at least give him I don't know, here, take a free bag or something. Nothing. I was very...
stopped at AM, PM on the way.
Yeah, it was, but it was very well done. And it certainly brought to life what weightlessness is all about.
Yeah.
Just for Peter's benefit, this business of standing up on that vehicle is right where the hooks are.
Uh-huh. Was that more dangerous than the flight itself?
Well, they were all greased up, so it was very slippery up there. And we were being towed around by a truck. But Peter's XPRIZE requirements was that the pilot has to live for 24 hours after the flight. I'm trying to wave the flag and do all that stuff, but I'm
in front of his boss and his new boss,
Yeah.
Richard Branson and Burt Rutan, who are sitting on the tailgate there. So an accident waiting to happen.
So I'm slipping and sliding, going, if one wrong move here.
So again, what a fabulous story. Thank you so much to our panel.
Thank you for listening. This has been Into the Impossible, a podcast of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination at UC San Diego. Our warmest thanks to our panel guests, Peter Diamandis, Julian Guthrie, and Brian Binnie. Pick up a copy of How to Make a Spaceship or one of Peter's books, Bold, How to Go Big, Create Wealth, and Impact the World, and Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think, wherever books are sold. We would also like to acknowledge the Clarke Center's patrons and sponsors, including Viasat Inc. and the Founders Orbit, for the support that makes these projects possible. To find out more about the Clarke Center and other exciting projects that are underway, please visit imagination.ucsd.edu. The podcast is made possible with support from the Clarke Center's patrons and sponsors, including Viasat Inc. and the James B. Axe Family Foundation. Audio production is by Wes Hawkins and Patrick Coleman, produced by Patrick Coleman and Sheldon Brown. Special thanks to UCSD's Media Services for their AV support during the event itself, and thanks to everyone who's been listening and sharing the podcast. If you're on iTunes, please leave a review. We appreciate it very much, and thanks again.
The only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic.
5, 4, 3, 2,